The stale air of the control room tasted like old coffee and resignation. Dust motes danced in the weak glow of the monitors, each one a tiny, indifferent speck in the vast, silent expanse I usually studied. Lately it felt more like a chore. My name is Dean. I used to look up at the stars with a burning curiosity, a hunger to unravel their secrets. Now I mostly just saw the same old patterns, the same predictable orbits, the same cold, indifferent void. The coffee in my mug had long since gone tepid, a mirror of my own enthusiasm. Years spent poring over data, chasing faint whispers of cosmic phenomena had worn me down. The thrill had faded, replaced by a dull ache of futility. What was the point, really? To catalog more rocks, to refine our understanding of physics by infinitesimal degrees. The universe was too big, too grand, and I was just one man, a tiny cog in a vast, uncaring machine. My gaze drifted across the bank of screens. The usual static, the hum of the deep space array, a comforting, if monotonous, symphony. I was supposed to be calibrating the secondary receivers, a task so routine it could be done with half my brain tied behind my back. The other half was probably occupied with the bills on my desk, the unanswered emails, the gnawing sense of a life unlived. Then, a flicker. It wasn't the usual interference, the solar flares or the distant chatter of pulsars. This was different, a tight, focused signal appearing on a screen usually as blank as my own prospects. My brow furrowed. I leaned closer, my tired eyes straining. The signal was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A rhythmic pulse like a distant heartbeat. My fingers, usually sluggish, began to move with a newfound purpose. I adjusted the gain, amplified the input. The pulse grew clearer, more defined. It was coming from Sector 7G, a region of space that was, according to all our charts, utterly devoid of anything. Not a star, not a nebula, not even a rogue asteroid, just emptiness. A prickle of unease traced its way down my spine. This wasn't right. Nothing should be broadcasting from Sector 7G. I ran a diagnostic on the array, checking for equipment malfunctions, for sensor drift. Everything came back clean. The signal was real. I pulled up the historical data for Sector 7G. Decades of observations, all showing the same blank canvas. No anomalies, no unusual energy readings, nothing. Yet here it was, a persistent, methodical signal. My heart, which had been beating with the languid rhythm of boredom, began to pick up a more insistent tempo. This was more than just an anomaly, it was an impossibility. I felt a faint echo of the old excitement, the thrill of the unknown that had once driven me. It was like finding a single, perfect note in a cacophony of noise. I cross-referenced the signal with known celestial objects. Nothing matched. It wasn't a known stellar phenomenon, no natural radio source. It was unique, and it was persistent. It didn't fade, didn't waver, it just was. The dust motes seemed to hang suspended, as if the very air was holding its breath. I was alone, miles underground in this forgotten research facility, the only human being privy to this impossible transmission. I initiated a triangulation sequence, trying to pinpoint the source with greater accuracy. The data streamed in, slow and deliberate. The signal wasn't just in Sector 7G, it was originating from a specific point, a point that shouldn't exist. A point in absolute nothingness. My hands trembled slightly as I typed. This was it. This was the reason I'd spent years looking up, the spark I thought had long since died. But this spark felt different. The final coordinates solidified on the screen. I zoomed in on the visual feed for that sector. Nothing, just the inky blackness, but the signal was undeniable. My gaze was fixed on the screen, on that single, impossible point. It was as if the universe was playing a cruel trick, a cosmic joke at my expense. But this felt too deliberate, too precise to be a joke. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A glitch in the deep space array, a misinterpretation of data, but every check I ran confirmed the signal's authenticity. It was real. It was originating from a place that shouldn't be able to produce anything. A shiver, unrelated to the temperature, ran through me. Whatever was sending this signal, it wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could comprehend. I'd always dismissed them as fanciful tales, the product of overactive imaginations. Now, staring at this impossible signal, a seed of doubt began to sprout. It was a place where things were lost, where the earth swallowed secrets whole. I took a deep breath, the stale air doing little to calm my racing pulse. The signal continued, a steady, unwavering pulse from the heart of nothingness. I had to know what it was. But the question that echoed in the vast, silent chamber of my mind was, what would I find if I followed it? Usually, my name is Dean. I used to look up at the stars with wonder. Now mostly I just saw the same tired patterns, the predictable waltz of gravity and light. But then there was the signal. It had slithered into my sensors like a phantom limb, a whisper from a place where nothing should be, a void, an absence of everything. Yet here it was, a rhythmic pulse, impossibly coherent, impossibly there. It defied every rule I knew, every equation I'd ever scribbled on a whiteboard. I'd spent the last 3 days in this room, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing, gnawing obsession. The usual cosmic background noise had become an irritating hum, a distraction from the delicate, alien melody that had burrowed into my consciousness. The signal wasn't just a blip. It was a structured sequence, a language without a speaker, a message without a sender. And it was coming from that impossibly empty patch of sky, Sector 7G. My fingers flew across the keyboard, coaxing the raw data into something I could grasp. The waveform was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not the smooth, predictable curves of natural phenomena, but sharp, jagged peaks and impossibly deep troughs, as if the very fabric of space-time had been torn and stitched back together in a way that made no sense. It was too perfect, too deliberate. It felt. I zoomed in, isolating a particularly dense burst. The frequencies shifted erratically, yet maintained an underlying pattern, a mathematical impossibility. It was like trying to understand a symphony by listening to a single, impossibly complex note. The more I looked, the less I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This was an announcement. A shadow fell across my shoulder. I flinched, the sudden movement jarring my concentration. "Still at it, Dean." The voice was dry, laced with that familiar, weary skepticism. It was the foreman. He was a man built of iron and cynicism, his face a roadmap of long nights and broken promises. He oversaw this forgotten corner of the world, this network of decaying structures and echoing tunnels. He saw only the dust, the rust, the dwindling budget. I didn't turn around. My eyes remained glued to the screen, to the impossible data dancing before me. "It's different, foreman. This isn't just noise." He grunted, the sound like gravel shifting. "Everything's different when I stare at it long enough. I look at that old winch over there." He gestured vaguely towards a hulking, corroded piece of machinery in the corner, and after a while I start seeing faces in the rust. Doesn't make it alive. I finally turned, meeting his gaze. His eyes were a flat, unyielding gray, reflecting the dim light of the room like polished stones. "This is different. This is structured. It's coming from Sector 7G. He let out a short, humorless laugh. 7G? Dean, there's nothing in 7G, not even empty space. It's a damn hole, a place where the universe decided to take a nap. I read Chasing Ghosts. It's not a ghost, I insisted, my voice tight with a frustration I tried to keep contained. It's a signal, and it's too ordered to be natural, it's too deliberate. I tapped the keyboard, bringing up a different spectral analysis. Look at this, the energy signature. It's not radiating outwards, it's folding inwards like it's being pulled into itself. The foreman squinted at the screen, his brow furrowed, but not with understanding. It was the look of a man trying to decipher a foreign language he had no interest in learning. Folding inwards? Dean, I've been down here too long. The air's getting too I need to get some sun. Maybe take a trip. See something that isn't on a screen. I can't just ignore this, I said, my voice rising slightly. The signal pulsed on the monitor, a silent, insistent beat. This could be monumental. Monumental trouble, more like, he muttered, running a calloused hand over his stubbled chin. This place is already a relic. We don't need any more anomalies. Especially not ones I can't explain. I know the rules. No disruptions. No bringing unwanted attention. Unwanted attention. The words hung in the air. Heavy and suffocating. He was right, of course. This whole operation, this forgotten outpost tucked away in the bowels of the earth, was a secret. A place for things that the world above didn't want to acknowledge or couldn't. The abandoned mine shaft, bottom never found, had been a perfect hiding place for decades. But secrets had a way of attracting other secrets. It's not just about this place, I said, my gaze drifting back to the monitor. It's about everything, if this is real. If something is out there sending this, then what else have we missed? The foreman sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that echoed in the cavernous room. We're not going to let this go, are I? No, I admitted, the word a quiet vow. I can't. He shook his head, a slow, weary motion. Fine, analyze my signal, but don't expect any help from me. And for my own sake, Dean, try not to break anything that can't be fixed. Some things. The signal continued its relentless pulse. It was a question, I realized. A question posed to a universe that seemed determined to pretend it wasn't listening. But I was listening, and I was starting to understand that the answer might be more terrifying than the question itself. And why was it calling to me? The supervisor's words, a low rumble of dismissal, still echoed in my ears. He'd always been like that, pragmatic, grounded, utterly dismissive of anything that didn't fit neatly into his spreadsheets. Some things, once they're broken, they stay broken. A grim assessment of my career, perhaps, or just his own weary outlook on life. It didn't matter, he hadn't heard it, not really. I sat back down at my console, the hum of the processors a familiar lullaby. The signal, it was still there, a faint whisper against the cosmic static, a melody in the silence. My fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up the spectral analysis again. The patterns were too regular, too complex to be natural. It was like finding a perfectly formed snowflake in a blizzard of random ice crystals. Hours blurred. The stale air of the observatory, thick with the scent of old paper and ozone, did little to stir me. My eyes, gritty with fatigue, traced the undulating lines on the monitor. Then a flicker, a subtle shift in the waveform. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, a pause, a breath. Breath hitched. I leaned closer, the screen inches from my face. The pause wasn't just a break in transmission, it was a marker, a punctuation. And within that brief silence, a new sequence emerged. It was infinitesimally small, almost lost in the noise, but it was there. A cascade of primes, not just a few, but an entire, impossibly long string. It was a language. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the cool air conditioning. This wasn't just data. This was intent. Who or what would use prime numbers as a preamble? It was too elegant, too universal. It spoke of intelligence, of a mind that perceived the universe in terms of fundamental truths. I started cross-referencing, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the signal's origin point. But now, with this added layer, this mathematical signature, I could refine the triangulation. The coordinates sharpened. They pointed not to a star, not to a nebula, but to a point of absolute nothingness. A pocket of emptiness so profound, it seemed to warp the very fabric of space-time around it. The supervisor would never believe me, not in a million years. He'd call it interference, equipment malfunction, my own frayed nerves, but I knew, I felt it. This was real. I pulled up the old geological surveys of the region. The sector was mostly barren, a desolate expanse of rock and dust. But there was one persistent anomaly, a geological scar that had always baffled the surveyors. An abandoned mine shaft, bottom never found. The depth was recorded as immeasurable. A vast black maw bored into the planet's crust, a place where light refused to penetrate and where the Earth itself seemed to hold its breath. The coordinates, they were close, terribly close, not to the mine shaft itself, but to the region directly above it, as if the source of the signal was. Looking up, or perhaps looking down, a metallic tang filled my mouth, the taste of pure, unadulterated fear. The signal wasn't just coming from space, it was coming from beneath. I needed to see it, to touch it, to understand. The landscape grew increasingly desolate, the scrubby vegetation giving way to cracked earth and jagged rock formations. The sky, usually a vibrant blue, seemed muted, a dull, bruised gray. As I approached the coordinates, the GPS signal began to falter, the familiar chime of location replaced by a static hiss. Then I saw it. Not a grand entrance, no flashing lights or imposing structures, just a ragged opening in the earth, a jagged tear in the planet's skin. The entrance to the abandoned mine shaft, bottom never found. The wind, when it blew, didn't whistle, it moaned, a low, mournful sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth. I killed the engine. A subtle vibration, almost imperceptible, thrummed through the chassis of my truck. It was coming from the ground. From below, I stepped out, my boots crunching on loose gravel. It didn't just absorb light, it seemed to repel it. A faint, phosphorescent glow, like dying embers, flickered at the very edge of my vision, just beyond the reach of direct sight. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic beat. My hand trembled as I reached for the heavy-duty flashlight in my backpack. It simply illuminated the rough-hewn walls, slick with some unseen moisture, and the timbers that groaned under the immense pressure of the earth. The air was thick with the smell of damp soil, of decay, and something else, something acrid and metallic, like old blood but sharper, alien, and then I heard it, not with my ears but somewhere deeper in the marrow of my bones, a resonance, a hum that vibrated through the rock, through me. It was the signal, amplified, raw. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The ground beneath my feet felt strangely yielding, almost spongy. It swirled, forming ephemeral shapes, hinting at structures that defied geometry. The hum grew louder, a physical pressure against my eardrums. My vision swam. The rough walls of the shaft seemed to ripple, to shift. There was I seeing things. There was the strain finally breaking me. Then something detached itself from the swirling phosphorescence. It was small, no larger than my fist, and it drifted towards me. It was a crystalline structure, impossibly intricate, pulsing with its own internal light. It hovered just out of reach, and as I stared, mesmerized, I saw that its facets weren't flat, but curved, impossibly so, in ways that made my head ache. It was a fragment, a piece of the source. Not words, but pure data, pure concept flooding my mind. Images, alien and vast, bloomed behind my eyes. Stars collapsing. Galaxies being born, all in the blink of an eye and a presence. Ancient, immense, utterly indifferent. The fragment pulsed again, and a single clear thought, not my own, formed in my mind. You are too small. What was this place? What was it doing down here? The air in the abandoned mine shaft, bottom never found, was thick with a smell I couldn't quite place. Not just damp earth and forgotten machinery, but something else. Something metallic like old pennies, but with an underlying sweetness that made my teeth ache. My flashlight beam, usually a steady white, seemed to flicker at the edges, as if struggling against an unseen pressure. Each step I took echoed unnervingly, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. This was deeper than I'd expected, much deeper. The descent had been harrowing, a precarious journey down rusted ladders and unstable catwalks, the sheer drop below lost in an inky blackness that seemed to breathe. I'd followed the signal here, or rather, the residual energy it left behind. My instruments had gone wild near the surface, the readings spiking erratically before abruptly cutting out. Now down in this cavernous maw, a faint hum vibrated through the soles of my boots, a low thrum that resonated deep in my chest. It felt ancient and wrong. My initial excitement, the thrill of a groundbreaking discovery, had long since curdled into a gnawing unease. What was I even looking for? A signal source? A transmitter? This place felt less like a research site and more like a tomb. My light landed on a section of the rough-hewn rock wall. It wasn't natural. Carved into it, or perhaps grown from it, were intricate patterns. They weren't geometric, not in any way I understood. They shifted and writhed at the periphery of my vision, like shadows playing tricks. But when I focused, they solidified into impossibly complex, almost organic forms. They pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, a sickly green that cast distorted reflections on my sweat-slicked forehead. My breath hitched. These weren't any known symbols, any ancient script. They felt alien, and they felt aware. A scraping sound, faint but distinct, echoed from further down the shaft. My heart gave a clumsy lurch. I froze, straining my ears. Was it just the mine settling, loose rock, or was I no longer alone? The hum seemed to intensify, a subtle shift in pitch that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I took a tentative step forward, then another. My boots crunched on loose gravel. The carvings on the wall seemed to follow my movement, their impossible geometry twisting as I passed. I felt a strange pressure building behind my eyes, a dull ache that throbbed in time with the hum. It was as if the very air was pressing in, trying to force something into my mind. I blinked, shaking my head, trying to clear the phantom visions. My hand brushed against the rock face, not with moisture, but with a viscous film that left a faint, tingling sensation on my fingertips. I recoiled, wiping my hand on my trousers, a wave of nausea washing over me. The sweet, metallic smell was stronger here, almost overpowering. My instruments were useless, my understanding of physics and astronomy utterly inadequate for whatever this was. I was out of my depth, drowning in a sea of the unknown. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. It was deliberate, a slow, dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across the stone floor. I spun around, my flashlight beam sweeping wildly. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. It prickled at my skin, a palpable sensation of being observed by something ancient and utterly alien. The hum vibrated through my bones now, a constant, disquieting tremor. Mind raced. I should turn back. I should flee this place, this horrifying descent into something I couldn't comprehend, report it, let others deal with it. But the astrophysicist in me, the one who had dedicated his life to unraveling the universe's secrets, screamed to push forward. This was it. The anomaly, the signal, it was here. And whatever it was active. It was making itself known. I forced myself to take another step. My muscles felt heavy, sluggish, as if the very atmosphere was resisting my movement. My flashlight beam caught something further down, a shape. It didn't look like rock, it was wrong, too smooth, too angular. A low, guttural sound like grinding stone echoed from the direction of the shape. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't geological, it was something else. My breath hitched, catching in my throat. My legs felt like lead. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The hum intensified, a deafening throb that seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but within my very skull. The phantom images returned, stronger this time, swirling with a disorienting intensity. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out, but they were imprinted on my mind's eye. When I opened them, the shape was closer. It was a structure, a construct. It was impossible to tell. Its surface seemed to ripple, to shift, as if it wasn't entirely solid. And from its depths, I could feel a presence. Not a physical presence, but something far more profound. A consciousness that regarded me with an ancient, terrible indifference. I could feel my own thoughts fraying at the edges, my grip on reality loosening. The sheer wrongness of it all was overwhelming. My scientific mind, so adept at understanding the predictable laws of the universe, was breaking against this incomprehensible tide. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an unmaking. The hum reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that filled the shaft, and then abruptly it ceased. The shape pulsed, and then slowly, deliberately, it began to move towards me. What was it, and what did it want? My flashlight beam, usually a steady, unwavering cone, seemed to waver, catching dust motes that swirled with an unnatural slowness. I descended for hours, the initial thrill of discovery curdling into a gnawing unease. This wasn't just a geological anomaly. It was wrong. I remembered the initial signal, the impossible signature that had pulled me from my comfortable academic life into this suffocating darkness. A whisper from the void, a pattern that defied all known physics. It felt like a vast, slumbering thing stirring in its sleep. My gloved fingers traced the rough-hewn rock face. The sweetness in the air intensified, a cloying perfume that prickled the back of my throat. But it was a decay that felt intentional. Like something had been deliberately broken down, its essence leached away. I'd brought a few things with me, basic geological survey equipment, a Geiger counter, a portable spectrometer, a high-resolution audio recorder. The Geiger counter was silent, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing. Whatever was down here, it wasn't radioactive in any conventional sense. The spectrometer, however, was going wild. It was picking up elements I'd never seen listed in any periodic table, complex molecular structures that shimmered and dissolved on the readout like heat haze. I stopped, my breath catching. The hum had changed. It was no longer a steady vibration, but a series of clicks and whirs, like ancient clockwork grinding to life. My flashlight beam swept across a section of the shaft wall, revealing something that wasn't rock. It was a smooth, obsidian-like surface, impossibly flat, embedded seamlessly into the rough stone. This wasn't natural. It couldn't be. This was manufactured, but by whom, or more terrifyingly, by what? The signal hadn't come from space. It had come from beneath. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the surface. It was cool, unnervingly so, and smooth as polished glass. A faint tremor ran through it, a ripple that seemed to originate from deep within the earth. The clicks and whirs intensified, and for a fleeting moment, I saw shapes forming on the obsidian surface, geometric patterns that shifted and reformed with dizzying speed, too complex for my mind to grasp. They were like schematics, but for something that defied all understanding of engineering. My audio recorder, left on a nearby ledge, suddenly emitted a burst of static, followed by a series of guttural, clicking sounds. It wasn't the hum anymore. It was something else. Something that sounded like a language, ancient and alien. A language of clicks and hisses that scraped against my sanity. I snatched the recorder, my heart racing. The display showed an incomprehensible waveform. The sweetness in the air grew stronger, almost suffocating. It was the scent of something vast and hungry, something that had been waiting. The obsidian surface pulsed brighter, and the patterns within it began to coalesce, forming what looked like a single, impossibly intricate symbol. It was a spiral, but unlike any spiral I had ever seen. It twisted inward, not just in 3 dimensions, but in dimensions I couldn't perceive, drawing my gaze, my thoughts, into its impossible depths. I stumbled back, my boot clattering against loose shale. The sound seemed deafening in the sudden stillness that followed the clicking. The hum returned, but it was different now, laced with a subtle, anticipatory thrum. The sweet, metallic scent was now overpowering, a sickening perfume that promised something unspeakable. I had to get out, but the symbol on the obsidian, it felt like a key to what? And if I found the lock, what would I unleash? The mine shaft bottom never found felt less like a geological formation and more like a tomb. A tomb for what? And was I about to become its gravedigger? My flashlight beam, usually a steady beacon, seemed to stutter, the light itself feeling thin and brittle against the oppressive dark. It had been days since I'd followed that signal down here, into this scar on the earth. Days of scratching at the surface, of pushing past the point where any sane person would have turned back. But sanity was a luxury I'd shed somewhere around the 3rd anomalous reading, the ones that whispered of impossible geometries and frequencies that should not exist. The sweetness in the air intensified. It was cloying, like overripe fruit left to rot in the sun, and it clung to the back of my throat. My hands, usually steady when manipulating delicate equipment, trembled as I adjusted the gain on the portable sensor array. The readings were off the charts, a cacophony of noise that somehow coalesced into a single, resonant tone. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, not exactly. It was more of a vibration that started in my bones and spread outward, a low thrumming that seemed to align with the very rhythm of my own failing heart. I remembered the first time I'd picked up the signal, a whisper in the void, a glitch in the cosmic background radiation that my instruments had flagged as an impossibility. I dismissed it, of course, a miscalibration, atmospheric interference, but it persisted, growing stronger, more insistent, until it was a siren song I couldn't ignore. It led me here, to this forgotten hole in the ground, to this suffocating, sweet decay. The walls of the shaft were slick with a condensation that wasn't water. It shimmered under my light, a greasy film that smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something that reminded me of a forgotten childhood fear, the smell of dust motes dancing in a sunbeam, but twisted, corrupted. Each drip that echoed from the unseen depths sounded like a slow, deliberate footstep. My breath hitched. I was alone, utterly alone, yet the feeling of being observed was a physical weight on my chest. It pressed down, making each inhale a struggle. I could feel the vibrations from the signal intensifying, a deep resonance that was beginning to warp the very air around me. The edges of my vision seemed to blur, the solid rock walls appearing to ripple, as if seen through heat haze, but the air was cool, clammy. Then a sound, not a drip, not a creak of ancient timbers, it was a scraping, nothing, just more rock, more dampness, more of that sickly sweet metallic tang. But the scraping continued, growing louder, closer. It was a sound that spoke of immense weight, of something vast and ancient moving with agonizing slowness. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and reason, felt like it was fraying at the edges. The signal, that impossible frequency, was no longer just an external phenomenon. It was inside me now, resonating with the very marrow of my bones. It was a language I didn't understand, but my body, my primal instincts screamed recognition. A low hum began to emanate from the rock face beside me. It wasn't audible, not in the way a normal sound is. It was a feeling, a deep, guttural vibration that shook my teeth and made the fillings in my molars ache. The sweet metallic smell was overpowering now, thick enough to taste, like licking a battery terminal that had been dipped in honey. I backed away, my boots crunching on loose gravel. Each step felt like a betrayal of the very ground beneath me. The scraping from below stopped. Silence descended, a heavy, suffocating blanket that was far worse than the noise. My flashlight beam wavered. The rock face was shifting, not crumbling but subtly rearranging itself, the lines of strata blurring and reforming like oil on water. It was a slow, geological ballet driven by an unseen force. I had to do something. The signal wasn't just a discovery anymore. It was an invitation, an opening, and whatever was on the other side was now pushing, trying to break through. I looked at my sensor array, at the frantic, meaningless spikes on the display. It was useless. This was beyond measurement, beyond understanding. My hand tightened around the heavy, rusted lever of a long-abandoned ore cart track. The sweetness in the air curdled, transforming into something acrid, like burnt sugar and something else. I could feel it now, a pressure building not just in the air but within my own mind. A thought that wasn't my own, a vast alien awareness brushing against the fragile walls of my consciousness. It was ancient, it was hungry, and it was here. What choice did I have? The signal had led me here, and now the source was making itself known. I could feel reality thinning, stretching, threatening to snap. The cavern seemed to breathe, to pulse with a slow, rhythmic beat that was not my own. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I looked at the lever. It was a crude, mechanical thing designed for a simpler purpose, but it was the only thing I had. The only way to stop it, to delay it, or simply to make a statement, a defiant act against the inevitable. The hum reached a crescendo, a silent shriek that vibrated through my very soul. The rock before me began to glow with an inner, sickly luminescence. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Acrid air burning my lungs. The choice was made, but would it be enough? My flashlight beam, usually a steady beacon, now wavered, painting jittery circles on the rough-hewn walls. I could feel it, a low thrumming against my bones, a resonance that seemed to emanate from the very rock. It wasn't just a sound, it was a pressure pushing in, pressing down. I'd done it, I'd answered, or perhaps it had answered me. The blinding flash, the impossible geometries that had briefly, agonizingly imprinted themselves behind my eyelids, they were gone now, but the echoes remained. My hands, I noticed, were shaking uncontrollably. I held them out, staring at the tremor. It wasn't fear, not entirely. It was something deeper, a profound disorientation, like my very atoms were vibrating at a frequency they weren't designed for. The metallic tang in the air intensified, sharp and acrid now, almost burning my nostrils. The sweetness was still there, cloying, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I took a hesitant step forward, my boot crunching on loose gravel. The flashlight beam swept across a cluster of strange, crystalline growths clinging to the mine wall. They pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, a sickly green that seemed to absorb rather than reflect my light. I'd never seen anything like them. Not in any geological survey, not in any textbook. They looked organic but wrong, too sharp, too angular. I reached out, my fingers hovering inches from one of the larger crystals. A prickling sensation like static electricity crawled up my arm. The thrumming in my bones grew louder, a deep, guttural hum that vibrated in my chest. It felt as if the earth itself was breathing, a slow, labored inhalation. I pulled my hand back, a sudden, inexplicable aversion seizing me. Where was the source I'd expected? I didn't know what I'd expected. A machine, a beacon, something tangible. But this place, this shaft, felt like a conduit. The signal hadn't come from here, it had come through here, and whatever I had stirred, whatever I had awakened, it had left its mark. The air felt heavier, denser, as if it was saturated with an unseen presence. I turned, intending to retrace my steps, to get back to the surface, to the familiar, mundane world. But the passage behind me seemed different. The shadows were deeper, more absolute. The familiar smell of damp earth was gone, replaced entirely by that unsettling metallic sweetness. My flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the gloom, catching only fleeting glimpses of the jagged rock face. A sound, a soft, scraping noise, like grit being dragged across stone. It came from further down the shaft, from the unfathomable depths. My breath hitched. I strained my ears, trying to discern it, trying to place it. It wasn't the scurrying of rats or the drip of water. This was deliberate, slow. I forced myself to move, my feet heavy, reluctant. Each step was an effort, as if I were wading through thick, invisible syrup. The thrumming against my bones was now a constant, low-grade ache. The crystals on the wall seemed to glow brighter, their internal light pulsing in time with the unseen rhythm. I felt a growing certainty that I was not alone. The question wasn't if something was down there, but what? And how much of it had already seeped into this place, into me? It was accompanied by a faint, wet rustling, a sound that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. I raised the flashlight, its beam trembling, and swept it across the darkness ahead. Nothing, just the rough, unforgiving rock, slick with an unknown condensation. But the air had changed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the pervasive hum. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, almost suffocating. It was the smell of decay, but also of something impossibly ancient, something that had existed before the mountains, before the stars. Then a new sound joined the scraping and rustling. It was too low to make out words, too sibilant to be human. It seemed to coil around me, an invisible serpent of sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears. But the sound bypassed them, resonating directly within my skull. When I opened my eyes, the flashlight beam had died. The cloying, metallic sweetness. I was trapped deep within the earth with whatever I had awakened. What was it that had been slumbering in the abandoned mine shaft, bottom never found, and why had my signal called it forth? My flashlight beam, usually a steady white cone, seemed to waver, the edges blurring into a sickly yellow. I'd followed the signal down, deeper than any surveyor's report indicated, into a space that felt wrong, like the earth itself had exhaled a breath it never meant to take. My fingers, slick with a cold sweat I hadn't noticed forming, tightened around the heavy wrench I'd picked up near the entrance. It was a pathetic weapon against whatever this was. The signal, a discordant whisper that had haunted my instruments for months, had finally coalesced into a physical presence down here. It wasn't a sound, not really. It was a vibration, a low thrumming that resonated in my bones, in the very marrow. It made my vision swim, the rough-hewn rock walls seeming to ripple like water. I took a step forward, the crunch of loose gravel under my boots unnervingly loud. The sweetness in the air intensified, a cloying perfume that coated my tongue. It was the smell of decay, I realized, but not of flesh, something far older, something that had been dead for eons, yet was now stirring. As I moved closer, the thrumming grew louder, a physical pressure against my eardrums. It was a sound that should not exist, a symphony of impossible frequencies. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. It was like looking into a hole punched through reality, a tear in the fabric of everything I understood. The metallic sweetness was overpowering now, thick and suffocating. My head pounded, a dull, insistent ache that mirrored the vibration in the air. This was it. The source. Not an alien artifact, not a forgotten experiment. Something older than stars, something that had slumbered in the interstitial spaces between dimensions, disturbed by my prying. The signal hadn't been a call, it had been a wound, a leakage. I raised the wrench, my arm trembling. What was I even doing? This wasn't a problem I could solve with physics or brute force. This was fundamental. It wasn't a shape I could define. It was a suggestion of form, a shifting, rippling distortion that defied geometry. My mind reeled, struggling to process the impossible angles, the impossible colors that weren't colors at all. It wasn't a voice, but it conveyed meaning. A vast, ancient indifference. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a loose rock. The wrench clattered to the ground, its metallic ring swallowed by the growing thrum. It moved with a speed that defied logic, a silent, inexorable advance. This was not discovery. This was annihilation. My mind, my very consciousness, felt like a fragile shell about to be crushed. I could feel the edges of my sanity fraying, the familiar world dissolving into a maelstrom of impossible sensation. I turned and ran. My boots scrabbled on the uneven floor, my lungs burning with the foul air. Behind me, the thrumming intensified, a sound that was now a scream in my skull. The sweetness was everywhere, a phantom taste of cosmic rot. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, driven by a primal fear that had stripped away all pretense of scientific detachment. I scrambled up the mine shaft, my hands raw, my muscles screaming. The faint light of the entrance above was a beacon, a promise of escape. I burst out into the weak afternoon sun, gasping for air that tasted blessedly clean, blessedly normal. I collapsed onto the dusty ground, my body shaking uncontrollably. The abandoned mine shaft, bottom never found, was behind me. But the feeling of it, the echo of that ancient, terrible presence was now a part of me. I had found the source of the signal. I had seen, or rather perceived, something that should not be, and it had seen me. It hadn't destroyed me, not yet. It had merely observed. Like a child poking a fascinating but ultimately insignificant ant. The signal was gone from my instruments. The anomaly had ceased, but the knowledge remained. That vast, indifferent emptiness was out there, in the spaces between the stars, in the forgotten depths of the earth. It was not defeated. It was merely waiting. I stood up, my legs unsteady. The world looked the same, but it wasn't. I was changed. The universe was no longer a canvas of predictable physics, but a fragile veneer over something ancient and hungry. The stars, once objects of my fascination, now felt like the eyes of something ancient and terrible watching me. Had I truly escaped? Or had I merely been allowed to leave, marked for a later observation? The sweetness, faint but persistent, still lingered on my tongue.